Hi guys, thank you all so much for tuning in and welcome back to Sewing Clara. In today's tutorial, I will teach you how to do 3 straight hand stitches. We have here the running stitch, 2 versions of the back stitch, and 2 versions of the so-called chain stitch. These 2 are absolutely necessary to be able to start with stitching, and they will also come in handy later when you will move on to your sewing machine. This one is more a decorative stitch, but it's still pretty, and I think it's really great to know how to make this stitch. For this tutorial, you will need a thread and a needle, a piece of spare fabric. I also recommend using a guide and then either a sewing crayon or simply a crayon that is a different color than your piece of fabric. And you might also need a few pins and, of course, scissors. So once you have all the supplies ready, we can start. I'm going to use a piece of old blanket and a really thick yarn. That's a yarn you would normally use, for example, for sewing jeans or thick fabrics, but in this case, it's going to be more visible and easier for you to follow the types of the stitches that I will be presenting today. Before you start stitching, of course, you have to thread your needle, so I decided to double thread it, which means I pulled the yarn all the way through and tied both ends together to a little knot. That way it's a little bit more secure, and also since I'm demonstrating the stitches, this is a little bit thicker and it's easier for you to see. Another possibility would be to just pull the yarn through and leave about that much on one end and tie the other end to a little knot, but while sewing you would have to secure the yarn like so that the shorter end wouldn't get pulled through while you would be stitching. I prefer this for so many reasons. As I said, it's a little bit more secure and stable, and the second reason is it's just so much more convenient and I don't have to watch the loose end. The next thing I did was I took this guide and a sewing crayon and I made a line where we will be stitching, because I find, especially at the beginning, that it's so much easier to stitch when you have a guide. And later when you will be stitching something where you will have a curve, you can be so much more precise. So no matter if you're a beginner or advanced, this is a nice thing. These crayons are big helpers and they get washed out 100%, so you don't have to worry about any stains. For any type of stitches, not just for the running stitch, you want your work to be as neat as possible. You want to try to have all your stitches equally long. And that might be a little difficult, especially if you're starting out, if you're not used to that. So there are a couple of options how to help yourself. So I already made here this line, which will give us the direction, and it will create a guide for us. And you can then decide how long your stitches are supposed to be, and you can make a few marks. So let's say every half a centimeter. This is not really nicely visible on this type of fabric, so in that case you could simply take a few pins and put every half a centimeter a pin at an angle to the line, and that would give you an idea how long the stitches are supposed to be. It's a little extra work, but again, if you're starting out and that's something that does not come so easy for you, there's no shame in helping yourself. Make your life as easy as possible, and when you have some tools that help you with that, just use them. Now let's get started with the running stitch. So I want the stitch to start here. So I will put the needle through the back side of the fabric so that it comes out on the right side. And I'm gonna slowly pull it through. I like doing it kind of in sections because especially at the beginning the thread is longer and it might get tangled. And then I like turning it over and making sure that there are no extra loops so that the entire thread is nicely pulled through. And then I adjust the thread so that the needle is centered. And now I will put the needle through here So I will start at the right side of the fabric and pull the needle through on the back side of the fabric. And again, I'm just gonna slowly pull it through, especially now since I have here the pins. The thread likes to get tangled and it makes me angry all the time. And we don't want that. We want to avoid that. And you can see that it kind of twists, and that can be very annoying. So rather work slowly, especially at the beginning. Now we'll check the back side, turn the fabric again to the right side, and then I will put the needle through the back side of the fabric and pull it out here again. So this is the easiest way, the slow way, when you're just getting used to it. And again, I like turning the fabric, making sure that there are no loops, that it's not too tight or too loose. And let's do it one more time. So put the needle through towards the back side, slowly pull it through, make sure it doesn't get tangled where our pins are. Look to the back side if it looks okay, and we will return like so. You can see it's pretty easy, and it's a very simple stitch. So let's see how it looks like. It looks good. So that was the easiest way, the beginner way. And now when you feel a little bit more comfortable and when you can judge the distance a little bit better, what you can do is you just put the needle through to the back side and immediately come through the right side and go again through the back side and come out. It depends on how long your needle is. You will be able to do it 2 or 3 times, but my needle is not so long, so that's enough. And now I will simply pull at the needle and pull the thread through, and I already have a couple of stitches. And again, I like adjusting the thread so that the stitches look neat. And we are going to move this way all the way to the other side. So and there you have it. Now I want the running stitch to end right here, so I will pull the needle one more through, then I will come out at the other end and I will do a little sew up. So I don't pinch the needle completely through. I will sew only through the most upper surface of the fabric a couple of times. And the last time I put the needle only half through and I twist the thread clockwise around the needle. Then I secure it here with my thumb and pull the needle through. So now I have here a little tiny knot. I will chop the thread, and there you have it. We just finished the running stitch. Now you can see that the stitch here is not so neat, but you can kind of pull with the needle a little bit through if there are some little inconsistencies and kind of save it. And there you have it. When you feel even more comfortable, you can save yourself the time and you can kind of ruffle the fabric while putting the needle through like so, and make many more stitches at the same time. So basically just pinch the needle through as many times as you can, again depending on the length of the needle. And I'm almost all the way through to the other side. I grab the end of the needle and now I pull the thread through. I will still look back to the other side, make sure there are no extra loops, and you can see how many more stitches I did at the same time. So this is going to save you time, but start whatever way feels the most comfortable for you. Everyone has to do their progress in their own time. And now you could see there was a tiny little knot that started happening. In that case, it's always good to pull a little bit back and pull your finger through the thread and slowly move it through and adjust it, and we finished another row. And of course, once you're done, you will turn the fabric to the wrong side and you will do the sew up so that the end would be also secure, and then you would be done. Sometimes you don't have to make knots on any end. That would be, for example, when you use the running stitch only to secure 2 pieces of fabric before you start sewing them through on your sewing machine. In that case, make sure that you do not use the hand stitch exactly on the line where you will be sewing through on your machine. So let's say this would be the line where you will be sewing on your sewing machine, so you are about 1 millimeter away with your running stitch, because you don't want the machine to sew through this thread. Otherwise it would be really hard to pull the running stitch out later, because this is just your help, just to keep the pieces of fabric together. Now normally when I'm sewing on my sewing machine, I'm just pinning at an angle, because that way I can sew through. But there are situations where I feel more comfortable when the pieces are stitched together with a running stitch. It's a little bit more secure and I don't have to worry about the pins. And in that case, you would have a little piece of yarn sticking on each end. And once I would sew through on the sewing machine, I would simply grab here the yarn and pull the running stitch out. And I would have here only the stitch from the sewing machine. Now let's do the back stitch. It looks kind of similar like the running stitch. The difference though is that there are no empty spaces between the stitches. So I have here these 3 pins. Between these 3 pins I will have my 2 first stitches. So the stitch will start here, but since it's a back stitch and I will be always returning, the place where I come first through with my needle from the wrong side will be here in the middle, which is basically, if this is the start from the beginning of the first stitch, then this is the end. That's what I'm gonna call it. And that's also going to be the beginning of the second stitch, and here will be the end of the second stitch. So I'm gonna come through, I already threaded my needle and made a little knot. So I'm gonna come through where the first stitch will end, which is our red pin. And then I'm gonna return towards my white pin. And here I have the beginning of the first stitch. And now I will pinch the needle through from the wrong side to the right side where the second stitch will end, where we have our green pin. So I will carefully pull the thread through, make sure nothing is tangled on the back side. And now I have to go 1 back again. So I will pinch the needle through where the first stitch ended and pull it through on the wrong side. And here we have our first 2 stitches. And now let's make a few more. So I will come through here where the third stitch will end. I will return where the third stitch starts or the second stitch ends. And if you want to make it a little bit faster, you can always come through immediately like so. So the needle is kind of halfway through. It's on the wrong side of the fabric, and I will return here. I will pull it through on the right side where the next stitch will end. And if you still have pins, be a little bit careful so that the thread doesn't get tangled and it doesn't get caught on the pins. You can always readjust the position of the needle so it's centered and make sure there are no loops on the back side. And let's make another stitch. So again, I will come here through where the third stitch ended, and now it's going to be the beginning of my fourth stitch. And I will move towards left, which is going to be the end of my fifth stitch. And that's the principle of a back stitch. What you need to know about this stitch is that since you're always returning, you will need more yarn than for the running stitch. So it's very likely that you would somewhere run out of yarn and you will have to do the sew up at the wrong side of the fabric, which is what I'm gonna do right now. I'm just gonna return here because I still have enough thread for that. So I've finished the next stitch. Now I'm going to turn the fabric and I will do the sew up here, and then I will simply thread my needle again, and then I will continue so that I can finish my row. Now I threaded the needle again and we'll continue so that we finish the row. So I come here through where the next stitch will end, return, and then put the needle through again, one stitch further, and that way we will finish our row. Of course, this is a really big length. This is just for the purpose of demonstrating this stitch. Normally you would make these stitches a little bit smaller, but I found that when I tried to make the stitch a little bit smaller, it was not so easily recognizable on the camera. So that's why I decided for this purpose to make the stitches much bigger than I would normally do. And here we go. Here we finished our row. Let's do the sew up and then we are done. There is a way how to kind of fake the backstitch and do the whole thing a little bit easier. So I want the stitch to begin here. So this is where I'll start. I put my needle through and all I will do is to move across this line with a simple running stitch. Now that I moved all the way through, and this last section is also where I want my stitch to end, I will simply turn my work around so that I can move again from right to the left. And I will do the running stitch in the opposite direction. And whenever I'm going to be pinching the needle through, I'm going to make sure that I pinch it through where the stitch began and ended. So I will come here through where the stitch started, or actually ended, only I twisted it around, but that doesn't matter. I think you get the idea. And I will move through here like so. Take your time for this because you really want this to look as neat as possible. And this is going to be the result. So very similarly looking like the backstitch, only I find that it's so much easier and it goes so much faster because you can do this where you kind of ruffle the fabric just like we did with the running stitch when we did the faster version. Just try to be as precise as possible with the beginnings and ends of all the stitches, and also make sure when you pull the yarn through that it's equally long. And if it's not, like here for example where there's a little loop, then simply readjust it with the needle and pull on the end again, and do it as often as necessary to get the best result. And I will continue doing the running stitch towards the beginning. And now I came to the end, so I will do the sew up. Now, the advantage is obviously that you can move a little bit faster, and another advantage is if that would be stitch that would be visible from both sides, it looks much neater, because when I turn the fabric around, This is what the kind of faked backstitch looks like from the other side. And this is what the real backstitch looks from the wrong side of the fabric. So you have to decide what's more important for you. But for now, I'll do the sew up and then we are done with this version. And there you have it. So these are the two versions of the backstitch. The next stitch that I'm going to show you is the so-called chain stitch. So I'm going to be stitching again from right to the left, and I want my stitch to start here, which is where I put the needle through for the first stitch. So now I will put the needle through one more time, only a tiny little piece away from where I came through, and move to the left. And then I take this end of the thread and loop it around my needle. And I like holding it here and slowly pulling the thread through, because that way it doesn't get tangled and I get the smoothest result. And now you can see it really looks like a link of a chain. So I'm gonna pinch the needle through here, right next where I just came out, and move one stitch length towards the left. I leave the thread here around the needle and secure it with my thumb lightly. And then I pull the thread through, and as I move a little bit further where the thread gets shorter and shorter, I can let go and carefully pull so that the stitch would be tighter. It's a very pretty stitch. It's a stitch you can use for embroidery or for some special effects on your pieces that you will be sewing or stitching. I think it's really nice. So in this case, when you notice that one of the threads is a little bit looser, always loosen it a little bit up and readjust it so that it looks nice. So again, I will pinch the needle through here, right next where I just came out, and I move again to the left. Make sure that the thread remains above this thread. I will secure it with my thumb and slowly put the needle through. And next, again, a little bit below where I just came through, one stitch to the left, secure the thread with your thumb, start pulling the yarn through. Okay, that was not the best example because I pulled on one side a little bit more, so that's okay. It's gonna happen to you too, probably. We will pull it out with the needle, readjust everything so that it's again nice, and finish the stitch. And if it still doesn't look good, you can again readjust it with the needle. This takes a little practice, and I admit I haven't made this stitch in a long time, which kind of shows, but at least I still remember how it goes. So again, I moved one stitch further to the left and pull the yarn through. I personally find that sometimes it helps to turn your work a little bit at an angle, so that's something you will have to try out. Whatever works for you, there is no right and wrong, but exactly for that reason, I like having a drawn line so that I keep the direction. And now I came to the end, so I will simply put the needle through a little piece behind the loop, like so. And then I will turn my work around and I will do the sew up as usual. And now we finished our chain stitch. There is a second option how to make a chain stitch. The difference will be that instead of having the links made of double threaded yarn, it's gonna be single threaded. So I will start here exactly at the position where my first chain stitch started. And you can see that I already made a line for myself. And for this, I like turning the work at 90 degrees angle because I find that it's a little bit easier. I have to separate the thread here and I will make sure that my needle is centered. Now I want the stitch to end here, so I will put the needle through but come immediately back only a tiny little piece above where I came through towards the wrong side. And I like securing this with my thumb because I find that that way the thread doesn't get tangled. And here I have my first link. So it's a little bit more subtle than the first chain stitch that we just did together. So again, I'm going to separate the thread, put the needle through where I want the stitch to end and come back immediately above the position. I will secure this all with my thumb and slowly pull the threads through. Especially at the beginning, don't rush it, take your time because otherwise the thread might get tangled and that can be a little bit discouraging. Again, let's separate the thread, put the needle through where the stitch is supposed to end and come back immediately above it. Secure it with your thumb and slowly, carefully pull the thread out. And this is how we'll continue until we finish our row of the single chain stitch, or single threaded chain stitch you could call it. Sometimes I notice that the thread is a little bit twisted, so I just simply untwist it. I always take my time for it because it just makes the work so much easier and definitely less frustrating. And now I came to the end of my simple chain stitch. So I basically just come through here at the end towards the wrong side, and then I will do my sew up. Congratulations, now you learned the 3 basic straight hand stitches. They will definitely come in handy, especially these 2. I hope that you enjoyed today's tutorial. Thank you all so much for watching and happy sewing!